What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of HR Heretics. Tom Clayton, you were a Sequoia-backed CEO, the VP at House during the heyday, the CRO at Bill.com. You've been like on 20 boards, which is still like crazy for me to process. And now you're the COO at Peek. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. So in our prep call, you blew my mind with this. You call it like the employee attribute chart. So, can you give our audience a quick download on what this thing is, why you do it, and then just share your screen and give us the insight?
Yeah, probably just to give a little bit of context before I flash a confusing screen up, but it's it's something I use specifically when I'm hiring large numbers for the same role. So think in sales, AEs or BDRs or SDRs or support reps or CSMs. Whenever you've got a current role that you have to fill, and there's tens, if not hundreds of them, try to get it down more to a science than individual emotions and who you like when you're interviewing them. And so what I do, and you can do this when you're building out a new team, or you can do this when you're coming in and evaluating a current team and trying to scale it. I I look at let's take sales for example, and I'll show you the example when I share my screen of sales. There's about 20 attributes that could be correlated to success in a role when you're in a sales role at the company. Uh, some people emotionally get attached to certain attributes over others, but the data doesn't lie. And so what I'll do is I'll go and score those 20 attributes. If I'm working with a current team, say we've got 30 AEs, I'll have three different sales managers score on each of those different attributes on a scale from 1 to 5. And the reason I have three managers is because everyone evaluates people differently, and so to get some of that noise out of the way, you have three different managers score them, and then you run a regression analysis against the past either 6 months or 12 months of performance. 6 months works if it's a fairly linear sales cycle. You have a very seasonal sales cycle, you need to do 12 months. And then always, without a doubt, four or five of them come up very correlated, and everything else is just noise. And so you can focus your entire recruiting effort on those four or five attributes and really focus in on them, as opposed to boiling the ocean. And what happens in most of these scenarios is you really like someone, you connect with them, and then you want to hire that person, but they're not always the best or the best fit for the role or for the company. I'll share my screen here.
So as you do this, so like just let me play that back slightly differently. So what I'm hearing is like these are the 20 attributes that matter for a specific role, regardless of the company. Then what you're saying is there's like four or five of these that matter contextually for the company. And what you're doing is then, the way you figure out those 4 to 5 is you're looking back on the top performers. And then what you're doing is saying like, now we need to assess for these very specifically in the interview process. Is that right?
Yes. And it does vary. I've done it in many companies, both companies I've been a part of them, companies I've helped advise or been on the board of. It varies by company. And that's the sort of surprising insight. Now, some of them are quite consistent. So if you look at the list here, I would say grit and work ethic tend to always rise to the top for sales specifically. And then some always are on the bottom. And so one I don't see here, industry expertise. That just some specific examples. At House, we hired former interior designers to be salespeople, thinking they could speak the same lingo. At Bill, we hired former CPAs and accountants, thinking they could speak the same lingo. Horrible salespeople. And industry expertise never is a correlating factor to success. And then some are very company specific. So at House, competitiveness was very high. At Bill, it was not an attribute that correlated at all. But then when we acquired Divvy was very high on the competitiveness side. And that really goes to the culture you have and that you've built. And that's why not all attributes are the same at all companies. One thing to note is a lot of people are like, well, these are too many questions to go by when you're interviewing
Right.
people. But that's why you have questions or cues. And you notice more than half of these you can answer with cues where you don't even have to ask them a question. You know, how interested are they in the job, or how, how much do they prep? They You can judge that based on the questions they're asking you. Have they gone to a LinkedIn profile? Are they leaning in? Some examples here, curiosity. Do they ask a lot of questions? Are they good questions? Are they naturally curious about the business? It's not like you have to ask them, are you a curious person? Like, you're going to get a canned answer out of that. And so a lot of
Hmm.
them I try to answer with cues as opposed to questions.
That's super interesting. Okay, so if you're listening and you're not watching on video, what we're looking at here is a Google sheet that has four columns. So column one says attribute, two says description, three says cue or question, and then four says example questions or cues to evaluate. And so, for example, if we go across on one of these, like you have coachability, and then is the candidate or how receptive is the candidate to feedback? That's a question. And then here's an example question, which is after the role play, give the candidate feedback and have them do it again. See how well they listen and incorporate that feedback.
Correct.
Okay. So, Tom, talk to me about this regression analysis.
Yeah, so it sounds complicated, but
It does.
it's pretty straightforward. It's you take the scores and you correlate them to sales performance. In this case, uh, BDR, SDRs would be different. It'd be more activity based performance, and the ones that are the most correlated to success, meaning a good track record within the company, are the ones that are going to be higher. Obviously, the greater your N is, meaning the greater number of AEs you have, the better the data set is. So when you're building out a team, it does take some cycles to get this right. You don't get it right with the first 5 reps you hire. You need a bigger N. And it'll change over time too as the company evolves and scales. Early days, maybe you don't have perfect product market fit. You're still figuring things out. It's a different type of DNA you're going to need. When you're got strong product market fit and you're just scaling as fast as possible, it'll probably be a different set of attributes.
Kelly, have you ever seen one of these?
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, but how, when, who did this come about? Has it been static? Have you had to evolve it or change it? I mean, I love it. I think we see the different variations of this. I'd love just to hear the story for folks on.
Yeah, I started doing a variation of this uh, at House, basically because we were growing extremely fast. I think it was maybe 50 people when I joined, and we scaled it to a couple thousand over a few years. And we needed to grow really, really fast. I mean, that was the days of hyperscaling, right? And going across many countries. And you wanted to get the framework right before you added, we were doing 5 countries at a time. And you didn't want to go and do 10 countries and realize you got the formula wrong. And so, and then I read a book. It's actually, he's since become a friend, a good guy, a guy named Mark Roberget. He was the first CRO or sales leader at HubSpot. He's now teaching sales at my alma mater, which didn't have a sales class when I was there. I started the sales club just to try to get HBS to recognize sales was important to companies. And he wrote this great book called The Sales Acceleration Formula. And a lot of what he talks about and how he thinks about it is very similar to what I was doing. And so I learned a lot from what he was doing, and took some of my thinking behind it and took some of his thinking, and I've evolved it. I started just in sales doing it, but it works within support. It works within post sales customer support. It works basically wherever you have a lot of roles that are doing the same job.
I think we've all seen different variations of this over the years. It's wonderful, Tom, and I think my view on this, if you look at the attributes, a lot of them are hard to measure. You know what I mean? They're subjective. They're like these human characteristics that are magical when people just nail them, but they're very hard to define, assess, even explain sometimes. And they're the kind of thing where if you ask 10 people, what do you mean by this? You'll get 6 or 7 different answers. And that's why I like it, because you have attempted or maybe mastered, I guess. I mean, how to like make tangible these things and unpack them, it's like culture, right? How do you define that and make it in a way that people can touch it and feel it, or values or whatever the thing? That's always the hardest part. So I guess I'd love for the audience to hear, and selfishly, because we haven't talked about this, how did you do that? Because the attributes in the left column are one thing. What I think is the gold part of this, which probably was a pain in the ass, was the questions to get to the cues and to train others to realize how to unpack that and judge it. Cause that's like the hardest part.
Yeah, 100%. It is part of the exercise. So first, there's when you're evaluating a current team, getting everyone on the same page on what each of those attributes mean, so you have some consistency when you're scoring. It's never perfect. It's not. You're trying to bring a. You're trying to make it. You're trying to make something objective that is naturally subjective, right? Or something quantitative that's qualitative, and it's imperfect. But getting everyone on the same baseline helps, and then training those that are doing the recruiting and the interviewing also helps. Over time, people get it. And the other thing that we can get into later, but when I do recruiting, I also like to have a lot of interviews, and I've got a lot of reasons around that, because I think the more data points are the better. And it's not just the more data points, but it's also, and this goes back to very early in my career, one of my first jobs working at BCG. I was interviewing with BCG, McKinsey, and Bain, and they put you through like 4 rounds of 3 case study interviews each, and you're prepping for these, and you go in them, you don't know what to expect. And by the time you're doing the 4th round, you're in their office, they're not visiting you on campus, and you go through this cycle of working just so hard to try to get the job that I remember driving back across the Bay Bridge and getting a call from BCG and saying, we wanted to extend you an offer. Like, I wanted to accept on the spot. I'd worked so hard to get it. And I didn't care I didn't ask, how much the comp was. I didn't ask what office they were going to put me in. I asked nothing. I just wanted to accept. And then when you do that, not only do people feel like they've earned it and have a much higher likelihood to accept, but they're also a much more committed employee because they feel like they've earned it. And it's just a different mindset when they start. And so I know a lot of people don't like long processes. The larger companies, you tend to also it becomes a really slow, elongated process. You don't want that either. But it is nice to have people feel like they've earned it. Like, I've had offers where I've interviewed with 2 or 3 people, and I feel like they didn't even test me. You get an offer, and I just don't appreciate it the same way.
Yeah, you have like an emotional investment already with that group of people.
Yes.
That's a really, I like that take. I mean, when I was at Google, we instituted the rule of 4, which meant you couldn't have more than 4 on-site interviews. And the reason we did that was because with people analytics, we looked at the data and said we don't learn anything more after that. That actually turned out to not be true.
Like 4 people or 4 trips?
4 on-site interviews, 4 different interviewers, 45 minutes long.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's also only looking at half of it. You're only considering what you get from those interviews, not what the employee gets too. Because the employee feels like they've met more people, they have more points of contact, they get more comfortable. And people also start to let their guard down over time too. So, the first interview, everyone's very stiff and buttoned up. And by the 6th or 7th interview, they'll drop an F-bomb because they feel more comfortable.
Totally. I actually found though too that 4 interviews, it feels like speed dating on both sides.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
I must admit, I used to believe that AI didn't actually exist in recruiting or HR. That is until my friend Heather Doche, who leads talent at Signalfire, told me to check out Metaview. I got into the product and was like, wow, AI actually does exist in recruiting, and this product is sick. Metaview is the world's #1 AI scribe built specifically for recruiting. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations, like intakes, interviews, and debriefs, then provides perfectly summarized notes of everything that was discussed. I've seen firsthand how tough it can be to extract consistently high-quality data from candidate conversations. I've been in debriefs where interviewers told us about their feelings instead of what actually happened in the interview. And I've seen VPs and CEOs block hires because they didn't learn anything from skeleton scorecards. Metaview changes everything. With perfect notes from every conversation, your people can focus on creating a human connection with candidates, and they can save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. But it's so much more than just a time saver, because perfect notes means perfect data. For every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can make confident, informed decisions, and talent leaders can finally take control of the interview process. Metaview covers all your compliance needs, works with all your existing tools, and takes less than 3 minutes to set up. Join talent leaders at organizations like Brex, Deal, HelloFresh, and Quora, and check out Metaview. Head over to metaview.ai/heretics to talk to one of Metaview's product experts. Tell them that me and Kelly sent you. Or you could just go to their website and get started for free. You'll be up, running, and AI enabled in minutes.
There's something to be said about, expediting the process. But I just always found that that even though data may have said that we don't learn anything more beyond 4 interviews, I always felt like, I don't know, I'm learning something about the person and they're learning more about us, to your point, which I think is a really good one that I hadn't considered.
Well, I'll just give you an analogy. You go out on a date. Do you feel like you know as much about your now significant other after 4 dates than after 20 dates? No.
I hate dating. I've never really done it, so yes. I don't know.
I bet you're totally right, Tom. But so the other take that Kelly and I have had is interviewing is very performative, and job simulation, when you can do it, is so much more effective. So what's your view on job simulation and work trials and those sorts of things?
Yeah, I mean, where I've seen it be very effective is, well, the case study example within a BCG or McKinsey obviously is a good one. But with sales, we always have a role play where they're selling something. Some companies I have given them a download on everything our product does and have them sell it. Sometimes I prefer just to have them sell what they're selling today and walk me through it and see how it goes. And then always give them feedback, have them do it again, and see how coachable they are and how they incorporate that feedback. It's very important in a sales role. I think that is the most valuable data point or interview we do in the process. And it's usually later in the process because there's usually 2 or 3 people involved in that. But I think it's great. It's a lot more difficult when you are hiring senior execs because, having them come to you and having a CMO first of all, it could be borderline insulting for a senior person to say, hey, I'm going to have you do this as you would do as a CMO here when they've been a CMO 3 times over, right? And so you got to be a little sensitive to that. And it's also just hard. What case study do you come up with for a CMO or a CRO? You get a lot more from a conversation, but I think for more junior roles, it's very effective.
Have you seen a good work trial, work simulation thing for a senior go-to-market leader?
No, and I'm actually not in favor of it because I've just seen too many people, myself included, get kind of annoyed at it. It's like, if you want to know my domain expertise in a certain area, just ask me all the questions you want. And I've seen people react the same way when I'm interviewing. Well, when others have interviewed them and tried to do that, it's just more difficult to do at a senior level.
Yeah, one of the things we did at Carta, which was kind of interesting, I don't know how much data you actually get, but we actually invited prospective execs towards the end of the process to a couple of exec meetings. And they got to sit down and actually listen to what was happening in the exec room. And then after the fact, we were able to we were just like, what's your take? What do you think? And just kind of doing it very open-ended. Again, it gave some signal. It's not the best, right? It's not like they're actually doing real work, but you could see how somebody thinks. You could see how somebody is going to or wants to take part in the group level discussion. I actually did find that kind of helpful.
I love that idea. Most founders are a little sensitive to
They are
bringing outsiders into that level of discussion. But I love the idea. I know as a candidate, I would love it too, because it's a two-way street. You're trying to figure out if there's a good fit there. There's a bunch you don't know, just like a person interviewing is putting on their best face, the company's doing the same thing, right? And so by getting behind the curtain a bit, it's helpful for the candidate as well.
Yeah. I
Yep.
mean, most of my venture jobs, I wouldn't take it unless I engaged in that as a candidate, usually followed by like a dinner or something else. And I just talked about it today with Quizlet. Like we're hiring a CMO, and I was like, I think you got to do this, because at this level, to your point, Tom, it's not about, hopefully, it's not about the functional or technical expertise. I mean, if it is, it's a whole nother session. But it's like what Nolan, we've talked about this. When CXO level hires fail, 9 times out of 10, it's based on chemistry, philosophy, style, fit, all those things. And I think you can suss that out really well in like a mock exec meeting, and have a conversation. So I think it's important. And if an executive balks at that, I think we've also talked about this, Nolan, that's a red flag, whether it's ego or this or that. And it's like,
I mean, that they should never balk at that. That's valuable for them too.
totally. Like, but I've seen it. Some are like, what, how much longer is this process? And I've talked to 6 people. It's like, have a nice day.
Yeah, no, that walk away from that. That's a huge red flag.
Yeah. But just to close out the attributes really quick, I think, again, a lot of folks don't jump into this pool because it's so hard. Like, where do I start? How do I make these intangibles tangible? And I would say, even if you get it 30% right and you try, you're making things better, because to your point at House, like 250 to 2,000 people always ask, like, how do I scale culture? And it's like, I'm always like, culture's like a huge game of telephone. And I believe that the best cultures scale well, the more successful you can make that game of telephone. So how can you, and usually that's tied to making intangibles very clear and like more tangible, so that maybe 8 out of 10 people say it the same way versus like 3 out of 10 before. So I think it's really cool trying to make that real and scale that out.
Yeah, and it evolves over time, right? Maybe you're 30% accurate in the beginning, you get to 50%, you get to 70%. It's at least you're headed in the right direction.
Yeah. And there is no such thing as perfection, right? Like it's always a work in progress.
But in the absence of that, what happens? You're a founder. We've talked about it, Nolan. You are terrified to let anyone else judge this stuff. So you have to interview every single person. And then we know what happens from there.
Yeah. All right, Tom, I want to talk about team building. And you had mentioned this also on our prep call of just the importance for you. And you had mentioned some interesting activities like doing your own outreach, right? So like what are the activities that you do to build world-class teams?
Yeah, when it's a direct report, for sure, even key hires a layer or 2 down, I like to be very involved. So I'll do first my own outreach to my network. If I'm hiring someone, a CMO or CRO, I'll go and reach out to the best CMOs, CROs I know. And, maybe there's a little probing them to see if they're interested, but also birds of a feather flock together and say, I'll ask them not who they would recommend, but who's the best they've ever worked with. Because they're not always shooting as high as you're shooting, right? They're thinking about who's available. I'm thinking about who could be available. And then I'll talk to them. And it's just a network of conversations trying to figure out who could be good candidates. I always reach out myself directly. Obviously, if there's a warm intro, that's great, but I'll reach out cold. I found that the conversion rate or the response rate is just significantly higher than having a recruiter reach out on my behalf. Everyone likes to feel flattered. I noticed it with my brother. He was at Apple back in the day, and he was running finance for first the iPhone, then the iPad, and then the iWatch. And he was, Apple, you get very sheltered. And he got this email one day, maybe one of the first emails he got from a recruiter, because he was so enclosed within the Apple realm. And it was from a tier 4 VC saying they wanted to recruit him as a venture partner, operating partner, something like that. And he's like, hey, what do you think? Should I consider this? And I'm like, well, you could do so much better than this. Like, if you really want to leave Apple, then do a proactive search and I can help you with it. But don't just take something because you feel flattered because they reached out. But I use that to my advantage all the time. There's times where I've had to get extremely creative hiring, especially when I'm hiring in areas where I have no background or expertise. So when we're building out House, there's 20 plus countries and we had to hire an editorial function with a full editorial staff to write about home and gardens and interior design and architecture. I don't have any background in this, right? And so the team and we got creative. In every country, we would go to the magazine store. We'd buy Architectural Digest, Home and Gardens, Interior Design magazines, like a dozen magazines. Flip a few pages. They have a page with all the editors and authors on it. Start reaching out to them on LinkedIn and ask to grab a coffee. And I was blown away at how receptive they were, not just having coffee, but they all wanted to leave because they were in a dying industry and they all wanted to come to House. And so we got the creme de la creme of editors by country just by being creative. A few others that I sort of rules I live by, and I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but don't be a brand bitch. A lot of people really focus on certain brands, like, oh, I want salespeople, so I'm going to go look at Salesforce, or back in the day it was Oracle. The reality is, some of the best employees I've hired are from companies I had never even heard of before. And sometimes they're great companies. I just don't know the whole world of all the companies out there. But at the same time, people that join a company after it's got strong product market fit, it's scaled, the operation is mature, is very different than the people in the beginning. And typically I'm hiring for high growth startups. And you need people that can figure things out and be very malleable and adapt and just be hustlers and be scrappy. And you're not going to typically get that when you're hiring based on brands and where someone's worked at a later stage in that company.
Don't be a brand bitch. I'm definitely going to steal. You would also mention something about your current CEO, like showing up on a vacation you were at.
Yeah. So in general, a lot of what influences recruiting I've done is how people have also recruited me. The most recent one, Rizwana, our CEO founder, we were talking for a few months and she had flown out a couple of times. We spent a lot of time together. And for me, at my stage of my career, that personal connection and culture fit's the most important. If you're not having fun what you're doing, you're A, it's going to be miserable, and then B, you likely won't be successful. And I was flying to Thailand for Christmas break with my daughters, and she just happened to be going on vacation. And she's like, well, I'll go to Thailand too. And we met up in an island. We were in Phuket and we spent the day together. It was actually my birthday. It was December 23rd. Spent the day together on the beach, having lunch, chatting about the business, her vision, my thoughts, just going through a lot of stuff and getting to know each other personally. And it was great. And that, I was already leaning in, but that put me over the top. Like, someone's going to fly out to Thailand. She was going there on vacation, but still it just shows how committed she was to the partnership and how she viewed me. And I knew that I was going to be given an environment where I could be successful. There's probably a couple other examples like that. The BCG one is one where I've learned something from. One, when I was coming out of business school, IBM was trying to recruit me, and the chief sales officer for the software division, it was in his group. And I was on vacation for the weekend in DC. I was at one of the museums and I got a call from him, and it was like on a Saturday, and started talking to him in the museum. And it was like an hour-long conversation. Just the fact that someone so senior was calling me on a Saturday and spent an hour talking to me was flattering in itself. But in the beginning, he asked me, oh, my son goes to Georgetown. Where are you staying? And I just said the hotel and didn't think twice of it. my wife and I went back to the hotel after we finished the museum tours, and lo and behold, there was flowers and chocolates and a bottle of champagne in our room. Like he just took that one cue, heard it, and had someone send us that to my hotel before I got back. And I try to do that a lot when I'm hiring someone senior. You know, when I was running a company in Singapore, I had to relocate most people. And it's not just the person you're recruiting involved in that decision. There's a significant other, there's a family. And so sending a gift basket, what it's like to live in Singapore, just thinking creatively, flying them out on a trip.
That's awesome.
That's so cool. I mean, it just like my 7th grade basketball coach used to say it's not the big things, it's the little things. I guess like flying to Thailand is kind of like a big thing, but like, you know, it just shows that you care in a world that kind of just like doesn't have like a whole lot of like care or like humanness, especially in interviewing. Like we just get into these weird like robot states. Like I love how that is done.
Yeah. Do you both feel like that has, yeah, sorry. Do you both feel like that's subsided a bit as of late? Like
Absolutely.
I don't have any hard data, but it's like anecdotal. Like the heyday, there was a lot of stuff, you know, and I just feel like the last, I don't know. I just wanted to ask if you both have noticed less of it, because I have noticed less of it.
Yeah. And so we're in a virtual world. So many of us work remotely. And so, you know, you can click on and click off for Zoom meetings. And so it does become more impersonal. But I do think for those that leverage the personal touches, it becomes even more impactful and more valuable because not as many people are doing it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like my mom still does handwritten thank you notes for everything. Right? And it's like, I mean, my handwriting's dog shit, so I don't do that. But uh it does feel like that personal touch has been lost. And you know, Kelly, I attribute it to the phone.
I know. But like, you know, you were one of the recipients. I sent handwritten cards this holiday season, little holiday cheer, and my handwriting's also dog shit, but that's not really the point.
I actually I wasn't going to talk to you about it, but that is actually 100% true. I will screenshot it and share it on LinkedIn because it's really bad. It's like if it was I was like, babe, what does this say? Like,
uh, as I say to my wife, it's the thought that counts. So you just put that on your mantle, and you know, Tom. Yes, in addition to, I love this about, you know, creativity and the team building and talent attraction. How did you sustain great teams during, you know, the fun and the hell of hyperscale and the pressure? And I just love to share kind of, are you like a trust fall guy? Like how did you keep those together? And do you have non-negotiables? Like, I don't care if you're excellent, you do this and you're out. Like, what are some beliefs you have to keep teams strong and healthy?
Yeah. So I try to hire people that are ambitious, hardworking, strong gray matter because smart people just figure things out. Uh, but also team players. So non-negotiable to me is a non-team player, you know, a mercenary or someone, you know, when they're talking about I versus us or we, uh, you know, you're only as good as the team itself. And if someone's, you know, I hate politics, and if someone's going to introduce politics into an organization, it's going to be destructive. And so for me, that's a non-negotiable. And then ethics, you know, someone doing something unethical, and unfortunately it happens, and that's a non-negotiable for me too. And so those are sort of the two non-negotiables. But in general, if you build a strong team and you work hard together, you paint the vision and the goal, and you all rally around it, but then you just have fun doing it. You know, I'm very close to hundreds of my former employees, and I love watching their careers and the success they've had, and continue to back them, invest in them, be on their board, just stay in touch with them. When a lot of them live overseas, so when they're visiting the US, have them over at my place. I love it. And I think that collegiality of the teams creates great retention, and It's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's totally true. But so Tom, so topically right now, this is like I started another shitstorm on LinkedIn, Kelly, but basically Meta Meta has decided like Meta came out internally with an internal memo that said, "Hey, we're changing our performance process. We're no longer going to give people a year to turn around their performance. We're going to manage out the bottom 5%. We're going to give you like really generous severance, but like this is a change." People are freaking out about that. And Tom, I just want to like get like the nitty gritty from you. Ultimately, you can do all this attribute chart stuff. You can like run your regression analysis, but you're still going to miss in hiring. It's imperfect. It's not a science. And I have always found the kind thing to do for the employee, for the employee's colleagues, and for the company is to manage that person out as fast as possible. What is your take on that?
I 100% agree. I First of all, I think the Meta stuff, just making an announcement that they're going to do it is odd. I mean, it's at a different scale than I've ever been at, so I'm not going to get too much into it. It's maybe you have to do that when you're that large of an organization, but I would never announce a month in advance we're going to just let a bunch of people go, because all you do is create a bunch of panic. Just like if I'm going to do a layoff, I'm not going to go. I've seen some companies go function by function, so everyone's completely distracted and stressed out until it gets to their team. I just don't agree with that. We all make mistakes. There's people that they either interview it really well or they're great in a domain, but the culture fit's not there. There's lots of reasons, but you're best off for both the company, yourself, and the employee just to move on as quick as possible. I think it's really hard when you get one or two layers down for people to do that. And especially when you hire good people, they tend to not want to make those tougher decisions. And it's hard. You grow to like someone, but maybe their performance isn't great, and you've got to make that tough decision. Um, but when you've done it hundreds of times, you sort of realize that it's going to be okay in the end. Like the person's going to land on their feet and be just fine.
And I haven't read your shitstorm yet that you started, Nolan, but come on, we all know that it's not really just about what was posted. There's a lot going on around Mark right now, and I refuse to call him Zuck. There's a lot going on with Mark right now, and I suspect that it's just all in one pot. And I'm not, taking side. I'm not, but I'm just objectively there's a lot going on.
So agree with that. Yeah, I do think people have a hard time like unpacking things. We should probably segment on that one. But okay, so Tom, the thing you had mentioned also is that you've had multiple employees start companies, and I'm really interested in this because, like, one of the things at DoorDash, we've had a lot of employees start businesses too. And then at Carta, we called it the Carta Cartel. Henry like writes a check into everybody that wants to go start a company. I'm finding that like more and more of these companies, specifically if they have good leaders, are really encouraging entrepreneurship. And then what ends up happening is if like the company's unsuccessful, you often see the employee boomerang back to the company. Talk to me about like what's your view of the world on this and how have you fostered it on your teams?
Yeah, I mean, part of it's self-selection, right? You're hiring people that are scrappy, smart people, driven, that have the profile of entrepreneurs. And then they come and they work for a few years or more, and they learn what it takes to build a company, to get product market fit, to scale it. And, they want to go, they're ambitious. They want to go do it on their own. And when an employee comes to me and says, "Hey, I'm thinking of leaving," first of all, I always try to have a very open position with employees where I'm very transparent. They're very transparent. If they're looking or thinking, I know well in advance, so it's not like here's my 2-week notice and I'm out. And the thing is, what a lot of people don't realize is people see how you treat other exits. So if you have one or two bad examples, then everyone's going to close up and not say anything to you, right? But if you treat someone that's exiting, even if you're frustrated with them or they didn't work out, but if you treat them well, then everyone's going to be very open with you, and you earn that trust over time. And so by earning that trust and having them come and say they're thinking about starting something, I can have a candid conversation with them. It doesn't sound like I'm trying to retain them. I've had, an employee recently was thinking about going to one of these VCs that do the incubators where they come up with the idea and then you try it. And so I didn't know it well, but I reached out to a few friends and I got a lot of bad references. I said, look, if you're going to go start something, just start something. Don't go to this because, the success rate is really low, and I'll support you and do it on your own and raise funding separately. I love when they do that. And yes, some of them do boomerang and some of them go off and start really successful companies. And I love it. At this stage of my career, I came from a very, very humble beginnings. My dad worked for the railroad, made 25 grand a year his whole life. My mom stayed at home. They adopted terminally ill kids. We had a big family. And my dream in life was to go to college because my parents didn't and make $50,000 a year. I've accomplished everything I've wanted in my life. And so I get more fulfillment out of watching the success of my employees than I do any career objective I could have at this stage. Like, that's what I enjoy and I love it. And just seeing, being a reference for them, investing in them, giving them advice, connecting them to people that'll help them. I love it.
I feel like it's so rare. It's so rare in today's world, right, Kelly? Like, Tom, that's such a cool story. What a cool story of like your family too, by the way. But it's just so rare in today's world to like actually have people that care. And that's one of the things, Kelly, is like if you're a job seeker and you have agency in your search, right? Which is a big if, right? And you get to that point in your career. I think one of the things that needs to be at the very top of the things that you care about is, are you working with real humans that you want to spend a fuck ton of time with? Because like we spend more time with our colleagues than we do with our families.
And being altruistic in this industry, and it's always going to win.
Yep, it does. Tom, this was a blast. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Yeah, Kelly, Nolan, thank you. It was great.
HR Heretics is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Econ 102, Moment of Zen, and Turpentine VC. Subscribe, 5 stars, share it on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, all the things.